to the flag of the United States of America.
There we go.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I ask for the approval of the consent agenda and the regular agenda at this time. Okay, the motion was made by Ms. Lane, supported by Mr. Massey. We need a roll call vote with all of the motions this evening according to the executive order following the Open Meetings Act, or the revised Open Meetings Act. So Ms. Lane? Yes. With that, I would like to open the public hearing that we have for the Special Assessment District for Meadowlark Drive in Granville Estates.
You'll have to take these out.
I'm sorry?
We can't hear you that well.
Oh, can't you?
On Facebook, we can't hear you.
Okay, I guess we're having a sound issue on Facebook. Let me just, I want to make sure we do one thing.
Disconnect your
Robbie, can you help me? I want to make sure we record this through WebEx. If you can bear with me for just a moment, we're having some technology issue right now. Yes. We just want to make sure that
We can't hear any of them.
we're recording. I'm sorry?
We can't hear any of them.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, because it's not
It's
here.
in here. You have to take these out.
Oh, okay. So we need to take it out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. Hold on just a moment.
Yes, disconnect your
Okay.
I see
I'm
Ron
going to-
Wiles as an attendee, but
Yep, here, just a second. Who is? I'm sorry?
Trustee Massey asked if the chief of police was on, and I see him
Okay.
on, but he's muted as an
Okay.
attendee.
You have the remote for the TV? Okay. All right, we're just bear with us for just a moment. We're having an issue with the sound issue on recording. Let's take care of this. Okay, you can go ahead and turn it up on there. Mute it on there. Everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, how's the sound now? I can use my headphones now? Should I mute it on?
Go ahead, put your headphones on. Connect it to your computer right
Okay, everybody can hear me now?
Yeah,
All can you hear it on the recording?
It's a delay.
Lots of feedback, Scott.
It's doing a load probably. Okay. Okay.
There's an echo.
So you might have to.
Representative.
Hold on just a quick second. Robbie, how do we mute everybody here? Over here. Okay, how is the sound now? A little bit of feedback still.
Yeah. I think it's coming from Facebook Live, maybe, Scott.
How's it now? A little bit better? It's a little bit better now? Can you guys hear me? Is the volume off on there? You guys hear me? Okay. Yeah, turn that volume up and I turn mine off. Okay. All right, I think we might have it figured out now. Okay. With that, we have a public hearing with regard to the special assessment district for Meadowlark Drive in Granville Estates. If you recall, we had a special assessment district hearing for the other streets in this particular subdivision at our last meeting. A group of residents in that neighborhood wanted to add their street to this project, and so they undertook getting the residents on their street to sign a petition, which they received 100% participation in that petition. And so this public hearing is open for anybody that in that special assessment district that wanted to speak. With that, I'm going to open the microphone for the attendees and see if there's anyone that would like to speak with regard to the public hearing for special assessment district for Meadowlark Drive and Granville Estates. Is there anyone that wishes to speak? Okay. Seeing that there is no one that wishes to speak at this time.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
It looks like everyone is still on mute.
Yeah, I unmuted them, but some of these people have their own system muted. But I've clicked on unmute a couple of times, so okay. But thanks for mentioning that. So I've seen that there is no public comment with regard to the special assessment district. I'll close the public hearing with regard to that special assessment district public hearing and bring it back to the board. And at this time, we'll go to citizen comment or public comments, and we'll open the microphone for anybody that wishes to make public comment. Is there anyone that cares to make public comment at this time? Okay. There was an individual that sent in an email, and let me bring that up real quick. The email is from a Frankie Herkner, and he asked to read this statement. Frankie Herkner from 6395 Wyndham Place, Grand Blanc. Hello, members of the board. First, thank you for continuing with the regularly scheduled board meetings. I know this isn't easy for anyone, and we appreciate everyone making the necessary accommodations to maintain the meeting schedule. I would like the township board to consider giving hazard pay to our police and fire department employees during this unforeseen pandemic. These employees are continuing to provide the high level of service this community expects and deserves. Unfortunately, it comes at a cost to their families, as they cannot truly isolate themselves without incurring a huge financial burden. Current options include staying at a local hotel at nearly $50 to $80 a night, whereas most of them are going home and attempting to lessen the chance of contamination by removing all their clothing and immediately showering before having any contact with them. A few are even staying in their recreational vehicles completely away from family. A few area departments have already instituted hazard pay, such as the Michigan State Police, $750 per pay period, and the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, all hours paid at 1.5 rate of pay. Many other communities are also currently considering it. Additionally, I'm asking the board to consider reducing water bills for the next few months while the residents recover from this pandemic of COVID-19. Thank you for considering these requests. All right. Seeing no other public comment, at least not in written form or verbal form, we'll go back to the agenda. We have the approval of the minutes. I know Mr. Limita had suggested some changes. I'm not sure if everybody had those changes, if those were able to be sent back out again. Do you know Ms. Lane? Ms. Lane?
Sent to explain and then a short statement.
Ms. Lane, are you on? Something happened with your camera because we can't see you.
No, I don't have a phone. I'm
Okay.
still in front of my computer.
Okay. There were a couple of minor changes to the minutes. I don't know, Mr. Limita, do you know if those were sent back out to the board with changes? Mr. Limita, can you hear me?
Clerk Wayne did give a update and they weren't sent back out. My suggestion is that we just hold off on those minutes and have them approved at the next agenda.
Would that be acceptable to everyone?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, we have a consensus on that, but we'll just wait on the approval of the minutes till everybody makes sure they take a look at those. The consent agenda items, we voted already to accept those. The operational issues, the first one is the board will consider a resolution to approve the special assessment district for Meadowlark Drive in Granville Estates. And I am going to unmute, I don't know, is David Laddie still on the line? Yeah, there he is, he's on here. David, are you able to hear us? David?
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yes. I can hear you. Good. So tonight you have in front of you a resolution that will create a special assessment district for Meadowlark Drive. And you remember this is across street to Thrush and Robin. This is a small piece of the property. It is currently estimated construction-wise to cost approximately $50,000. And we have included that for subsequent for the reimbursement costs of two other projects. And the reason I mention that is because, again, this is a separate assessment district, but really it's a tail-end project for the Thrush and Robin project. The construction will occur at the same time. Although they're two separate, specifically two separate districts, they're going to be treated the same as far as financing is concerned. And so really, and again, we had 100% request by petitions. And so if you're so inclined and you want to adopt this resolution, then we'll have officially created the Meadowlark Drive Special Assessment District in the Granville Estates.
If someone would like to make that motion, go ahead and if you want to raise your hand or unmute your microphone and make that motion. So if I was saying, I think Lonnie was having trouble hearing me. If anyone would like to make that motion, just unmute your microphone. Here.
Your line is showing is muted.
I think you muted everybody.
Okay. Sorry about that. Lonnie, are you making the motion?
Resolution for Meadowlark Drive, I'll support.
Okay, motion by Mr. Guzak, supported by Mr. Mansour. Miss Lane, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
You want to go ahead and call for the vote?
Back.
Right. Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
He looks like he's muted. Go ahead again, Ken.
Mr. Thomas?
Hello?
Can you hear me, Scott?
Yes. Ken, do you vote yes?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Miss Lane. Miss Lane? Miss Lane?
Muted.
He's also muted.
She doesn't show that it's muted.
Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, it doesn't show that Kathy's muted on here.
Mr.
Much feedback. Something change?
Turn the volume down
Turn your volume off. How did you go?
on my computer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett?
Scott,
Yes.
you're showing muted again.
Yes. Yes. We were trying to work.
Yes. Myself, yes. It approved, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy, can you turn next to the mute button, there's a camera. And if you click on that, your camera will come back on, Kathy.
That it?
There you go. Okay.
There we go. There you go.
Okay, so the next operational issue is the board will consider a resolution to authorize reimbursement of expenses from the bond proceeds issued to finance the Special Assessment District street repairs in Granville Estates. That includes Robin, Thrush, and Meadowlark Drives in Grand Blanc Estates.
So moved, Mr. Chair. I'll second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Lane, seconded by Mr. Guzak. Ms. Lane?
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair. Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Myself, yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Massey?
Chair,
Yes.
I have a question. I tried to interrupt before we.
Okay.
It does not matter, it's just a general question.
Okay.
Do you folks see this project moving forward as scheduled?
Yes. We have not heard that the road commission is delaying their work. It's actually infrastructure work is essential, and so road work will continue.
Thank you.
Okay. Item C, the board will consider a motion to approve the request of the clerk to increase the pay for the May election to $200 for election inspectors and $250 for chairpersons and co-chairpersons.
I so move.
Support.
Okay, motion by Mr. Massey, seconded by Mr. Mansour. Ms. Lane?
Mr. Guzak?
Yes.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yeah.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Mr. Vancour?
Yes.
Myself, yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes. You have a new name there, Mr. Mansour.
Another alias.
Yeah.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes, Mr. Atkins.
Yes. I thought I was, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Do you have a question, Mr. Atkins?
Yes, so.
Okay. Go ahead.
See, I wanna make sure I got the right agenda, so the next item is D.
Correct.
Next.
Yep. Okay.
Alright, I'd like to read something off for a second, if I could, and I know these are limited agendas, we're talking to a lot of people in the community, and listening to a letter that was sent to us by a resident. I'd like to get some discussion. First, let me read something. Bear with me for a second.
Lonnie, Mr. Atkins, would you mind, I know Dennis has prepared a report and emailed it to us. Would you mind if we went through that and then we'll take the comment that you've received? Because it may answer some questions. I don't know if everybody saw the email late today that went out, but it's kind of a moving target because we were waiting to hear what the governor had to say for the continuation of the emergency order. And so we drafted this fairly quickly to send out. So Mr. Lehman, would you like to go through that? I know the public doesn't have the benefit of seeing that, so we may have to read some of it, but if we can go through the different departments on what we're doing right now, that'd be appreciated.
Sure, Mr. Supervisor. The document that Scott's referring got sent out, I don't know, late this afternoon, and I tried to put the update together based upon the governor's actions today. And first and foremost, you know, I think most people are aware, stay home, stay safe order was extended to April 30th, meaning we'll continue to move forward with only approved critical infrastructure employees and support staff reporting to work. Township office will remain closed to the public for the duration of the order. Made some comment on a couple of the acts that came out. First, the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Recovery Act. It primarily put some provisions together to assist small businesses, but it also includes an opportunity for local governments. We're still trying to finalize this this or get more information, but it looks like we could participate in the employer payroll tax deferral plan. This could allow for a zero interest loan for up to 2 years by allowing us to retain the 6.2% FICA portion of employee payroll withholding between March 27th and December 31st of 2020. Would need to be paid back over the next 2 years, 50% back no later than December 31st of 2021, and the remainder in 2022. This could become important if we see some challenges to our revenue stream through the state by way of statutory revenue sharing, but I can get to that, or constitutional revenue sharing in just a minute. The other big act was the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, and that includes provisions for emergency paid sick leave and expanded family and medical leave to certain public employees. Although important here is that first responders are not covered by the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. The act does provide for certain paid leave to assist families affected by COVID-19 virus, and includes provisions for refundable payroll credit for up to 10 days of paid sick leave, and a relief of paying the 6.2% FICA tax for expanded family leave. That would offset some of the increased costs of administering this program to the township as an employer. And will also brush upon a provision, because the first responders were not included in the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, that the board may want to consider offering them some relief as well outside of that act. Another consideration I'm going to ask the board for tonight is with the update to the Stay Home, Stay Safe order requiring closure of the office through at least April 30th. I will ask the board to authorize me to initiate layoffs for non-essential personnel. While we have made every step to keep most employees working efficiently from home, there are certain classifications of employees where this is not practical for an extended period of time. Union collective bargaining agreements dictate the seniority and the notice period required for represented employees. Non-represented employees could be laid off immediately. With the additional $600 weekly COVID-19 unemployment assistance added to the normal rate, the majority of employees would be financially sound during the crisis, including if we initiated these layoffs. But I would ask the board to consider keeping the employees' health care intact versus giving COBRA notices, as we do expect all employees to be recalled as soon as the order is lifted. If the board so chose to do so, you could continue to have the employees pay the 20% share of the medical premium during any layoff periods. The first responders that I spoke about, in light of the fact that they're not included in the provisions of the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, I would suggest that you may want to consider providing a policy for COVID-19 emergency leave for police department and fire department personnel. The police department has instituted changes to scheduling to try to reduce the risk of exposure for our officers, including platooning some officers to remain at home on call during their shift. Our calls for service have been reduced through the cooperation of the residents with the Stay Home, Stay Safe order, and our police unions have worked with management to creatively address new temporary safety measures. But we should still provide some peace of mind in regards to potential paid time off leave banks. My policy proposal would be that all full-time personnel from police and fire would receive 80 hours of COVID-19 paid leave to be used for the purpose of dealing with either COVID-19 illness, quarantine, or a family member's illness, and that all part-time police and fire personnel would receive the average of their weekly hours averaged over the last 6 months of COVID-19 paid leave to be used for the purpose of dealing with either illness, quarantine, or a family member's illness directly related to COVID-19. There are some other financial considerations that I think the board should be aware of. We are tracking all the potential reimbursable expenses related to providing service during the crisis, and we'll continue to investigate all those options through the state and federal programs. But one area of concern is a loss of revenue to the state through the sales tax decline. Michigan has an approximate $1.5 billion rainy reports I've seen are that the state will lose up to $3 billion during the economic shutdown forced by the COVID-19 crisis through the end of April. The legislature historically makes cuts to revenue sharing to local governments to balance state budget during a time of crisis, as witnessed by the economic downturns in 2001 and 2007. Township has lost more than $9 million in revenue sharing in 2008. The constitutional revenue sharing accounts for $3.3 million of our total general fund revenue for 2020, and a 30% cut could be devastating, both short and long term, to our financial future. It has been 13 years since the last recession, and we're still not back to the taxable value we enjoyed in 2007. So the township does need to prepare financially for the potential of a slow return to normal economic activity. Just closely watch the actions and programs available to the federal government for any assistance we qualify for. But with that, and knowing that if we did go into a recession after this, we'll have the impacts of the loss of taxable value again to deal with. I would just make sure that we do look for all the opportunities that we have to get reimbursed through some of these programs for the short term, and again for the long term, that we seriously consider even for the remainder of this year creating that policy for our first responders to give them some relief since they did not qualify for that Families First Act. That's my update.
Dennis, Dennis, maybe you can mention regarding what we've done on water bills as far as late fees and what I sent out to everybody today.
Yeah, it was published, it's on the website, but we did suspend the payment of any late fees having to do with utility bills for the DPW through the remainder of 2020 to allow people to have a chance to get back on their feet once they get back to work. I mean, understanding the impact that this has had on folks, and what that means is basically puts them on a payment plan rather than us trying to force late fees. They have the ability to pay what they can through the end of the year. We've never been a municipality that does shut-off, so that wasn't an issue for us when the executive order came out. We just don't do shut-offs for non-payment. We always have the ability to put it on to the taxes at the end of the year, which we've done. But this unprecedented crisis came up with the idea of being able to suspend those late fees and accept payments for as long as it takes to get people back on their feet when it comes to their utility bills.
So that's something that we control as far as the late fees. But you know, taking a 30% hit to our revenue sharing could be devastating, and that's something that the board just needs to be cognizant of. The state, obviously, the federal government can print money and can initiate programs to benefit us during this time. The state, however, any program they put out, they've got to find the money for that, and the revenue sharing may be a portion of where that comes from. But unfortunately, if we see a 30% cut, it could be devastating to our township government. So with that, Lonnie, you had your hand up first, so go ahead.
Can you hear me? Am I on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I'd like to, I guess I'll throw it out as a motion to get some discussion, but let me read something that Shelby Township has done in the last couple of days during a special board meeting. Unanimously approved a one-time emergency stipend of $1,500 to all active duty dispatchers, sworn police, safety personnel, including fire, ComTech 911 dispatch, police patrol, and police command.
Before you make a motion, let's talk about it, Lonnie. We can discuss it without having a motion, but we may need to craft it. But you know, I would be the first one in line to say that I would love to help our fire and our police. I already have received messages from folks in several different departments that feel they should be, if we were to do anything in terms of any kind of bonus, that they should be included as well, whether it's, I don't know if people realize we have an army of people in here working on the election right now. We've got our DPW guys are still on, and our part-time fire, so we're looking at probably 150 people that feel as though, you know, and I don't know, I'd ask Mr. Lehman to speak to that. I'm not sure how that works, you know, with the unions either, with them objecting. But Mr. Thomas?
Well, I would like to direct the superintendent to go back and to figure out what we can do and how we can help our first responders. They've been there for the crisis and they're exemplary. So I would like to direct the superintendent to go back and next week have another meeting to discuss it or at least have a executive session to that.
Mr. Laddie, are you still on the line?
I am.
Would that be yeah. I'm not sure that would qualify for an executive session, but
I agree.
Extra meeting.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think within the next few weeks, I anticipate that something is coming down from the federal government, another stimulus package to address some of the issues with the state in regard to the lower municipalities.
Well, let's hope so.
So what I am in favor of is what Trustee Ken Thomas echoed, is that now is the time for our finance department to start looking at the finance in a different way than we have in the past, which taking a deep dive to see what can be altered and what cannot be altered financially.
Okay.
I would concur with that opinion. I think that would be a wiser financial way to handle something, is to look at it more in depth.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that also.
Okay. Mr. Mansour, any thoughts?
Yeah, Superintendent Lehman threw out a lot of different suggestions here from, postponement, et cetera, all of which, and then benefits, what we would do for layoffs and how we could, continue healthcare coverage, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think all those are things that we should look at, but I would like to have a separate session to kind of quantify what those mean to the township in terms of the cost. And while I agree we want to do for our first responders, Supervisor Bennett, you're right, we have to kind of take all these other risks into account.
Yeah. Just a moment, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Lehman, Mr. Mansour is right, is that you brought up a number of things that I think this board needs to probably take some action on this evening. If you can talk just briefly, let's take them one by one. You had mentioned layoffs. I think, it's difficult to lay anybody off in terms of, we want to keep people employed that have been loyal to us. Unfortunately, they're going to get some unemployment that the federal government's even assisting with, but so we help me understand. I believe I know the answer, but it's either 7 or 14 days depending on the particular union that we have to give notice, Mr. Limita?
That's correct, Mr. Supervisor. The layoffs that we're discussing, it's not a great deal. Most of our people are considered, out of 200 employees, most of them are considered critical infrastructure workers or support staff, but it would involve a handful of people. There are certain things that we just don't have the ability to provide work for them, and a lot of it is customer-facing employees. So we're probably talking about less than a total of less than 10 employees that could be impacted by this. But because of the notice periods, I'm hoping that the board would at least authorize me to initiate the notices on the layoffs. One of the things with that I talked about with those Family First Act is that we can do the notice period. One of the ASME units requires a 7-day, the other requires a 14-day notice period, and we can pay them through the Family First Act for that notice period, and then have the notices go into, and then have them get notice, and then it goes into effect in 2 weeks. So as it was, if you gave me the authorization today, I can get the list to the union on Monday for the notice that would start the 7-day or 14-day clock ticking, and then we would initiate the layoffs after that.
Dennis, we would also need to decide on whether or not we would continue their health care, which would be kind of difficult to stop it and start it. But I see Mr. Guzak has hand up, and Miss Lane actually had her hand up first. So Mr. Lehman, if you can just explain before I go to Miss Lane and Mr. Guzak, would health care, I mean, it's going to be difficult to stop it. The unknown quantity here is if this is going to go into June. And I think what you're saying is even if we have to give 1 or 2 week notice, if we go into June, it's going to be waiting another 1 or 2 weeks to give these notices, right?
Yeah, if we had to give the 7 or 14-day notice now, and we noticed them on Monday, then it would be that their health care could be coming to an end, but yet we'd anticipate that they're going to be back to work May 1st. It just seems to me that it would be easier to carry their health care forward. We don't know what the situation is going to unfold. We don't know if the governor will extend it, but if we were to just carry the health care for these employees through there, we can still require the 20% share of medical premiums if the board wishes. But by the time we gave them their COBRA notices and they were to sign up for COBRA as their health care while they're going through this uncertain time, we probably by then already have them called back to work. None of us are anticipating that we're going to shut down for the remainder of the year. I think just maintain the health care. We have discussed it with Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they understand that if people come back to May 1st, they believe that carrying the health care forward through that time rather than to give COBRA notices makes sense.
Okay. I'm going to go to Miss Lane now. She had her hand up. Miss Lane?
I have a concern. I would anticipate that some of the 10 people that you're talking about assist with helping with the election, and we are getting hit with thousands of absentee ballot applications and having to get ballots out. And also some of those people have helped with our receiving boards and things like that. And that's May 5th, and that's still ongoing, and with 28,000 voters being notified, I want to know how that would affect my needing to call people back in to help in order to carry on a successful election.
So, Clerk Lane, I think it's a great question. We did talk about this in our planning, and quite frankly, if there's work for people to do, I mean, we're not interested in laying off people for layoff's sake. If there's work that's viable and for them to do, we obviously would rather to have people continue to work. As far as it goes from your elections, if we had people even who are on layoff and you want to bring them in as election workers or election help, that would be allowed. Or we can call them off layoff. There's other options. We can do partial layoffs where they'll get partial unemployment and then partial work. I mean, with the new Coronavirus Response Act, they've given us much more latitude when it comes to those.
Okay. Mr. Guzak, you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just had a question. Is it possible that if there's only a small number of people, couldn't we just pay everyone through the end of this month? And then hopefully we'll be done with this situation and you wouldn't have to go into the unemployment and everything else, because you said there's only a handful of people that won't be paid. So wouldn't it be easier just to pay everybody through the end of the month and then of course look at everything, and if it gets worse we can react then, but at least get them through the end of the month so no one has to apply for unemployment and all that other stuff?
I would say that's certainly an option available to the board. But what I'm looking at is just from a financial consideration, if we know that we don't have work available and we can initiate the layoff procedure, you know, as long as, if we knew they were coming back to work for sure on May 1st, I think that'd be great, but if we get closer and it ends up being extended to June 1st, we just missed, you know, a 3-week opportunity. We'd have to notice then, we'd go 14 days and start the whole process over again. And also initiate the process, give notice, and if it looks like the situation is clearing up before the end of the 14-day notice period, we can recall them at any time.
Yeah, I've got a couple other people ahead of you, Ken. So, and I just want to point out, you know, Mr. Limita, we have him here to try and, you know, help us with the options. And Mr. Guzak and Ms. Lane pointed out that, yeah, we can continue, you know, where we're at, but Mr. Limita is bringing an option to our board, and it'll be our decision, you know, to move forward on that. So, Mr. Massey had his hand up, and then we'll go to Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm greatly concerned about someone's health insurance. So before we take a vote, I'd like for you and the superintendent to really take a deep dive into someone's health insurance. What the crisis that we are facing right now, if we laid off someone and they didn't have a health insurance, that would be probably devastating to the township and that person's family. So let's try to do our best in going back, studying it again, and then come back to the board. Because when you bring something before me tonight, I understand the critical things that we're facing, and this is my first time hearing these things. I don't have time to make a firm, solid decision.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Massey. And Mr. Limita, I think if we were to give layoff notice, we could continue their health insurance without any issue, is what I believe I heard you say, Mr. Limita.
Absolutely, and that is my recommendation.
Okay, so Mr. Massey, if we move forward with giving notice, it doesn't mean that we'd even lay them off. It just means that we're reserving the option to, and we could continue the health insurance. Mr. Thomas? And then
I'd
Mr.
like to make the motion that we give Superintendent and Lima and Supervisor Bennett to start the layoff process for the folks that are not necessary for the township. Also leaving their insurance the same with Blue Cross and Blue Shield.
Okay. And you probably meant to say the non-essential employees right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. Mr. Atkins?
I'll support that, and then for one item of clarity.
Okay, so we've got a motion by Mr. Thomas and supported by Mr. Atkins. And we'll open it for discussion. Mr. Atkins?
Yeah,
and then,
so with that included in that motion, could we spell out exempting their 20% contribution in these unique circumstances?
you mean if we were to lay them off actually for that period?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Thomas, would you want to include that in your motion?
Not yet. I would like to discuss this more.
Okay.
Superintendent Limina, if they receive the state unemployment and the federal, how would that look in comparison to what they're making now? So for the majority of these employees, I guess one way to look at it, Thomas, is that when you consider, depending on where these employees fall in, and there could be some that are lower paid and some that are higher paid, obviously. But if you look at it as an average, you think of it as somebody who is making approximately $23 an hour, the unemployment should come to be roughly equivalent to where they were at wage-wise. So it could be very comparable. Some people could even make more money than they're making now. I know one employee for sure that would make more money than they're being paid now while they were on unemployment with a $600 federal money to it. The Superintendent Lehman, what's your suggestion?
I'm sorry?
Superintendent Lehman, what is your suggestion? I think it's really, I don't, it doesn't matter one way or the other. I think if we have them pay the 20%, we're not asking to pay any more than they are now. If you want to waive it, we can do payroll for the first 2 weeks anyway. The payroll deduction will come out because we'll be paying them under the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. So that will be the same payroll. And then it would be the following 2 weeks, we would ask, they'd have to give us a check. We don't have a way of getting it from unemployment. They'd have to send a check in to us. So you could postpone it. You could have them pay it back slowly over the remainder of the year when they're called back. I mean, a lot of options for the board.
Al's had his hand up, and then we'll get to Lonnie or Mr. Atkins after that. Mr. Mansour?
So that's what I understood is that the financial impact to the township, we would start to experience a savings basically immediately based on the transition of the payment for, while these ASME people were in their 7 or 14-day notice, the money would be paid from the Family First. So based on that and based on superintendent's characterization of these folks basically making what they had been making, it seems as though it makes sense to them to continue with their contributions. So I'd support that.
Okay, Mr. Atkins?
Could we at least add in there, I like the idea of them paying it back over time, because if you look at the Michigan unemployment system, it's an absolute 50-year-old train wreck. They'll be writing us a check long before they're even receiving a check. Some people aren't even getting through for weeks. So I'd be in favor of seeing if there's something we could do just to, if we're gonna collect the 20% from them, maybe over time, till they start getting the payroll from the state.
Mr. Mansour?
Yeah, so I understand, appreciate that, and maybe what we can do here is, start this process as has been outlined, and then at the last meeting of the month, we can kind of evaluate what we might want to do if we want to push some of that off or spread it out or whatever the situation may be.
I think that's a very valid suggestion because, we're not looking at laying them off immediately. It's going to take several weeks' notice, and we have some time in there, so that seems like a wise suggestion. Mr. Guzak?
So if we're not laying them off immediately, are they going to be paid through the end of the month or not? I'm getting mixed messages here.
Mr. Lemina?
They would be paid during the notification period from the township, and then after that it would be unemployment. So the answer is no. They'll be paid during the just during the notification period.
So is that till the end of the month then? So they would be paid through the end of the month?
Well, it could be. We can lay off some of the non-union personnel effective on Monday. We could do others after a 7-day notice and others after a 14-day notice.
We don't want to get into naming names of who those people are.
Well, what happens though, if you do something on Monday, that means that person's not going to get a check, right? They have to wait for unemployment to get paid. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, they would, they've got, our payroll is processed this Friday, so, processed for tomorrow, and then, they would immediately be filing if it was something laid off on Monday, filing immediately on Monday, and, they would get their check in whenever the process is for unemployment.
I believe it's about 2 weeks right now. So
yeah, we don't know how long that's going to be, and that's why I thought if we could just pay through the end of the month and try to work on this whole project, because we've just been thrown upon the whole thing tonight. So.
Okay. Ms. Lane?
One of the other considerations that I would prefer to give employees options instead of layoffs would be if they wanted to use a vacation time, personal time, portions of it, and if those that even want to use sick time, that would be their option. And
Okay.
again, I still figure making a decision tonight when I have had no opportunity to really sit down and run numbers, and we're dealing with 10 out of 100 plus people, it leaves me very uncomfortable.
The, you know, part of this is the challenge is we're not sure how long this shutdown is going to last. And I know part of what Mr. Lehman and myself have been talking about is waiting to see what the governor had to say today at 3 o'clock. And it looks like, you know, right now anyways, it looks like April 30th, but that could be extended further. So in terms of running numbers, what have you, I believe Mr. Lehman has said that on unemployment, some of these people will actually probably make more than what they are working for the township. And actually, apart from the township business here, I know that friends of mine who have employees that are on unemployment are going to have a tough time bringing them back because of you know, the amount that they're getting from that. So that's one thing that could be a little bit comforting, is that some of these people actually not only will they be made whole, they may be coming out ahead in terms of on the pay anyways, but it may take them a couple weeks, which it sounds like this Friday is a pay period. So if it's 2-week time to get their pay, then it would probably line up with our next pay. Mr. Atkins had his hand up, and then we'll go to Mr. Massey.
I was just going to echo the same thing as Clerk Lane about the vacation and sick time. It seems to be what all the companies are offering right now in terms of, you know, the options to exhaust those to at least continue to get your pay. So is that something you took in consideration, Superintendent Lehman?
Yeah, and they still have, again, within Families First Coronavirus Response Act, there's still the ability, like they're gonna get 40 hours of pay coming from that. As soon as we do the notification, I mean, if, you know, we're gonna carry them through. So I know that leave, these are emergency leaves, you know, that the federal government enacted, they're gonna get paid from that, again, up to 100% of what they were making, up to a limit, but I don't think anyone would exceed that limit, $500 or $511 a day. So I'm not as, I don't think anyone's going to miss a paycheck here. They can take their leave if they want. Obviously, they can take their paid leave at any time that they want to. But there are some new language in there about during a layoff on whether they can cash out vacation time and some other things if they're getting laid out, or if they hold that back for when they come. So there is some collective bargaining agreement language that is associated with that.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Atkins? Okay. You good with that, Mr. Atkins? Okay. I'm sorry. You okay with that response, Mr. Atkins, or the answer, or did you have a follow-up on that?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Massey had his hand up, and then I think we'll go to Mr. Guzak, I believe.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, we're faced with a situation that we've never been faced with before in the township. This is not something that may end within 2 or 3 weeks. So we have to deal with this situation with caution, with good thinking and good planning. Because if we make a haste decision, it's going to come back to haunt us. Now, we just got the information up on the meeting. So I feel as though we haven't had ample time to think about this. We're making a gut decision, but we may have to come back and make some other decision within the next 2 weeks. So we're going to compound a problem if we're not carefully thinking about this. That's the way I see it.
Okay.
I'm not ready to move until I think what the superintendent has laid out. I'm not against that, but I am against bringing it before me tonight. That has to be, I think there should be more discussion about what we're going to do so we have a plan going forward. Okay, if the situation gets worse, what do we have in place to move on?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Massey. And again, you know, if we were to give layoff notices, it doesn't mean that in fact, other than maybe 7 people, I guess, that would lay off on Monday, but we could always give notice, I guess, and wait till our next board meeting to take action on it, but at least we'd have given notice is another option. But did Mr. Guzak, did I see your hand up?
Yes. Just like we were talking, is it possible to start the process and then, like next week, have a meeting, either confirm it or change it? Can you, once you start it, can you stop it?
Well, what information would you want to have next week to confirm or not?
Well,
confirm?
if we start the process, well, first of all, one thing, it sounds like with the CARE Act, if the people that are laid off are immediately gonna get their wages out of the CARE Act, right? Even before they get the unemployment, is that correct?
Mr. Lemata?
So we're gonna pay them, how it works, and it's that Family First Act, the FFCRA. How it works is that we will issue their same normal pay, it's just that we're gonna issue it under that FFCRA pay code. So we can take full advantage of that.
Right.
And then that gives, we have up to 10 days that we can pay people under that. It went into effect on April 2nd. So we can really initiate the pay from April 2nd moving forward for 10 days, and then have the layoffs active. That was kind of the whole point, is that we have an opportunity with this program. It just came up, it just got passed, 7 days ago. And again, it's totally up to the board what they want to do. What this does, though, is by allowing us to move forward and give the notice, if we found out that things were better than we thought they were going to be, and it looked like the recall was going to happen on May 1st, you could always do, rescind the notification or do a recall immediately, or worst case scenario, most likely some of these folks would only be laid off for a potential week or 2. But if it goes longer, now we've done the notification, we've done everything right, and if it ends up going through the month of May, we are steps ahead. We've used the Family First Act like it was designed to be used, and people are on unemployment and moving through. In the event that it ended up being June 1st or some other date, it's really about the board being prepared to make financial decisions that help us financially and get the notifications done and move forward. But Treasurer Guzak, to answer your question, yeah, you could rescind that before the layoffs ever took effect. If for some reason new information came to light, a new program became available, whatever it may be.
Okay. Mr. Thomas, do you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. I'd like to call for the vote.
Okay, it was your motion was to give notice to the employees of potential layoff.
And to keep their insurance during the layoff period.
Okay. Ms. Lane, do you have that recorded, that motion?
I do, but was he going to also include with payback of the 20% contribution, or are we waiving it? That was still pending.
Ken said not concluded. Go ahead, Mr. Thomas. I don't think you included that at this time, right?
No.
And Mr. Mansour had pointed out that we can always do that at our next meeting, because that payment probably won't be due. If we need to spread it out or what have you, we can do it at that time.
All right, I wanted it for clarification.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Ms. Lane.
Mr. Mansour?
Here, let me make sure everybody's unmuted. I just mute everybody so that, because otherwise we're getting some feedback. So, okay, Ms. Lane, go ahead, everybody's unmuted.
I just have one other question.
Mr. Thomas called for the vote, but is it a clarification, Mr. Guzak, of the motion?
Yeah, it's a clarification. So with this, they they would get their wages from the, family first response first, right? I mean, they're gonna get that immediately.
We get it from us.
Yeah,
They'll get it from us, right? There's no delay on that check, correct?
Correct.
Cause the government's gonna pay us back, so they aren't gonna get their next check.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
The family first takes effect immediately.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Lane.
All right. Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
No.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Guzak?
No.
Myself, no. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Forty-three.
Okay. Mr. Limita, you also had a couple of other items that, you wanted.
Wait, ask, I'm sorry.
Yes. 4 to 3. Okay, Mr. Limita, you also had a couple other items that you had brought up that we needed to probably take action on or consider. Could you go through the next one that you had brought up as a suggestion?
And so Mr. Supervisor, just for clarification, I want to make sure I got this motion correctly, and that was to authorize me to start the layoff initiation and with the idea that we're maintaining healthcare coverage during the layoff, unless we have further discussion on it. Is that correct?
That's what everybody okay with that? Anybody object? That was the motion, so.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then the second that I'd ask the board to consider, that had to do with the first responders. Again, going back to the Family First Act, and with the recognition that police and fire personnel were not included in there, just to give consideration of creating a policy that, again, would allow all full-time personnel to receive 80 hours of COVID-19 paid leave, and all part-time personnel to receive an average of their weekly hours averaged over the last 6 months for COVID-19 paid leave to be used for the purpose of dealing with either COVID-19 illness, quarantine, or a family member's illness.
Does everybody understand what Mr. Lehman is asking? It basically gives our first responders additional paid sick leave, either if they or a family member that they're caring for actually have the virus. And you know, what we're doing currently also is we're platooning some of our police so they're not working as many hours as, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Lehman, but they're able to work from home on call to make sure that we're not overtaxing them and have people in reserve. But this would expand the amount of sick time they have all the way till the end of the year by 80 hours. Is that correct?
That's correct. What we're trying to do is preserve the paid time off that they currently have and offer them, you know, up to an additional 80 hours of paid leave to be used through the end of 2020 for any related COVID-19 illness, quarantine, or family member.
Okay, I saw Mr. Thomas's hand, and then Mr. Massey, and then Ms. Lane.
I would like to incorporate something like this into Trustee Atkinson's motion before the last motion. So, Trustee Atkins, could you work with this and add that into your original motion?
Well, I'm not sure it was in the form of a motion, but I think what I heard was that the board members would like to have another board member after Mr. Limita takes a dive into what possibilities are available. And if you want to wait on this 80 hour of additional sick leave, I guess we could wait until that, you know, and consider that at the same time. Mr. Atkins? Oh, I'm sorry, I think Mr. Massey had his hand up first, I'm sorry. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, I don't know whether you can answer this question or not, I'm the superintendent, but my question is, when the officers are on call at home, are they provided a vehicle, police vehicle?
Mr. Limita?
I don't know if the patrol cars are there. They're to stay at home, and then they're basically on call. So, I mean, one of the things we have, we could have 9 officers working at any given select time, and because our calls for service are down with the stay at home, so rather than still have all those 9 officers out, increasing the risk of exposure, some of them, I don't know the exact number, I'd have to have Chief Wiles give more information on that, but some of them were selected and it rotates through to be on call at home, and they can be called in at a moment's notice. I don't believe they have patrol cars at home. I think they would come in and pick up a vehicle and go at that time if needed, or but just think of it more as like an on-call situation. Obviously our goal behind that was to lessen the chance of exposure by having officers out. We still need to have all of them here and available and ready to go, but we don't need to have all of them making contact with potential infected citizens.
We've got Mr. Atkins and then Ms. Lane.
Yeah, just to clarify, for discussion earlier, it wasn't necessarily a motion. I only worded it that way to get discussion going around it, but I'd really like to, unfortunately it is really difficult having the remote meetings because there are a few things that we'd like to talk about a little more, which just seems a little difficult. But I'd like to dedicate maybe a special meeting very soon with some guidance from Superintendent Blemida. Maybe we wrap this 80-hour recommendation in with that, but I'd like to get some recommendation on doing something for our first responders, because it's just, a lot of communities are doing it. We know how the community feels about our first responders, and just a very tough situation that's going on. I think we should look at something we can do in terms of some sort of a stipend or hazard pay for all the first responders.
All right, thank you, Mr. Atkins. Ms. Lane's had her hand up, and then we'll go to Mr. Guzak after Ms. Lane. Ms. Lane?
If we were to give the additional 80 hours to all first responders, what if they didn't use it? Would that be cashed out at the end of the year with their regular sick time?
Mr. Lehman?
That's not my intention with the recommendation. My intention is that it is only available for the COVID-19 and emergency leave. So because they don't qualify for the Families First, we would treat it much the same. We're saying we're going to give you up to 80 hours, but it's specifically related to the Family First and illness associated or potential impacts to their paid time off. I mean, what I don't want is trying to have a void is that we've got firefighters or officers who are having to earn their own leave time. And our part-time firefighters don't have leave time, yet they have an impact to their finances, and this would really address that impact to their finances without having them to tap their own personal leave banks, currently. And something that done immediately and make the policy, and I just think the parameters have to have it to only dealing with COVID-19 illness, quarantine, or a family member's illness with no cash value.
So what would be the cash value of that, Mr. Lemata, if you were looking at 80 hours for one of, any idea what that would equate to, or?
A patrol officer that was, been here for, I think it's a 4-year step in the process, so patrol officer there, this could equate to over, it's going to have a value of over $2,000.
Okay. But we're not proposing cashing that out at all, the $2,400 or $2,000 or whatever it is.
No, what we're trying to do is give them peace of mind, let them know that, here you've got a leave bank to be used immediately, because we're in the middle of a crisis, and I don't know, we've been very lucky that we haven't had anyone test positive at this point, but if that were to happen, I just think that before they start hitting their leave bank, and I think it's unfortunate that they were left out of the Family First, giving them the 80 hours is maybe if nothing else is offering them not only a little financial, so it's not going to impact their personal leaves as it is, but it's just knowing that if it happened tomorrow, they could pick up the 80 hours and they had to be offered for days for an illness, to take care of a loved one who was suffering from COVID-19.
Thank you, Mr. Lima. Mr. Guzak?
Yes, I agree with Mr. Lima too, that this is a critical time and they need the peace of mind and know that they have that. Everybody else has it. So I would like to have that approved tonight, and then we work on the other stuff like everybody wants to do to see if it is feasible to give them extra funds, but at least now they know they're covered and they don't have to use their own time.
Yeah, I would at a minimum like to have us provide the 80 hours of sick time if they have the virus or a family member has it. Yeah, I know that they have some peace of mind. It is unfortunate that they were left out of the act. And then we can regroup to talk about anything additionally that we want to do. But I think at a minimum, to provide them peace of mind, I would ask that we consider Mr. Lima's suggestion or option that he's giving to us to offer that. Ms. Lane, you have your hand up?
We're all talking about they were left out. Was there a reason given? I mean, that's such an extreme.
Doesn't matter.
Leave them out of anything. So what was the reason given for doing something like that?
Really good question. Elaine, that's a really good question. And the short answer obviously is when you think of, it's basically an emergency addition to sick leave as well as an addition to the Family and Medical Leave Act, which does apply. If it's still out there, they can still take, Family Medical Leave Act time off. So that does exist, but it's unpaid. This was an emergency thing to kind of keep them paid for the short term if they went into this. One of the reasons you would leave first responders off is because if you're going to give them, you don't have the ability to control that. So if you suddenly had, because you can even use this act to stay home for up to 12 weeks to take care of your children because they're no longer in school or you don't have daycare. So one of the reasons the framers of the act put that, excluded first responders is because if that were to happen, we can't limit it. And if, this would be an extreme situation, but if 3/4 of your first responders took advantage of the leave to stay home, take care of their children because they didn't have daycare, closed daycares, how could you build first responders? And that would be my short answer on why they were excluded. Everyone recognizes the critical important first responders. It's just that with the leaves in place, I think it was that they also recognize that we couldn't possibly continue to provide the safety and protection that we do if we had more than half, take advantage of leave at any one time without any tools available to limit who could and who couldn't take advantage of the act. You can't limit it. It's available for everybody.
Mr. Massey and then Mr. Guzak. Mr. Massey? Mr. Massey, I'm sorry, Mr. Massey, and then Mr. Guzak following you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I have a very important question. I hope I can get an answer to it. If an officer comes in contact with a person that have the virus, how is that officer quarantined? What is the procedure?
So, if we do have protocols in place, they do have personal protective equipment for any contact. They have been given gloves, masks, eye protection, and it is required that they wear all their PPE for every contact, because you're not going to know, as you're well aware from the news reports, a lot of folks are asymptomatic. They don't even know that they've been infected with the virus. So they are required to wear PPE. And one of the things that has happened too last week, and hats off to Chief Lyles because he brought this, was to make sure that the 911 reporting system tracks addresses where there are cases of COVID-19, so that our officers know when they're going into a situation whether that home has been flagged as having a positive test for COVID-19, that there's a patient there. So they would take those same precautions with all of the vehicles get wiped down, everything. Now, if somebody ends up with an exposure, there is a policy in place for what they need to do. Even with the CDC, anybody who comes into even just an exposure that says that they have potential exposure, we're going to require that they stay home until they are symptom-free. 7 days symptom-free without the aid of medication is the minimum to make sure that we're not spreading the virus.
Okay. Mr. Guzak, I think you had your hand up. Mr. Guzak? Mr. Guzak, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted a clarification on that, because I know the only way they can use this extra 80 hours is if it's affected by, you know, the COVID-19, right? If they're in quarantine or somebody in their family. And so it seems kind of weird that someone else could go out and do something else. I know the state wouldn't allow, but can't we limit it and say, this is our policy, to say you can't do it for certain things, it's only the things that you stated in your policy, because that's what you suggested, right, Mr. Lincoln?
Correct.
That's correct. It would only be for COVID-19 related issues, whether it's a family member or one of our officers.
Right, so we're limited to that, so that way it's not going to be not everybody can do it. It's just they have to be affected. They're not affected, they don't get paid it, they don't get paid off or whatever. It's just to protect them and not use their own sick pay because a family member or themselves have it, right?
Right, it gives them 80 additional hours.
Right.
Mr. Mansour?
Thanks. So I think one of the issues that was brought up is, you know, if we adopt this same policy as everyone, you know, the so-called everyone else has, then we put our, I don't know the exact right way to say this, but we kind of put ourselves at risk of maybe not having enough police, first responder resources available. If, for instance, we get hit with a rush of either first responders themselves or people in their families needing them to take this. So, you know, what's a backup plan, or what's kind of a backstop if we all of a sudden start to get a rash of these?
Mr. Lima, any thoughts on that, or?
And that's, I think, exactly why, I mean, with the families first, that then it was, they could, like, it could be because a daycare issue where there was a lot of other things where somebody could have done it. This one would strictly be limited to illness, quarantine, or a family member, direct family member. So it really limits that potential that we would have out of 43 sworn officers, for example, and 40-some firefighters, that we would have 30 of them out at any given time. I'm not saying that it couldn't happen, but it would be a very worst case scenario, but that could still happen right now. They would just be using paid time off.
Sure. Okay.
All right. So, does anybody want to take any action on the 80 hours of additional sick time for our police officers? Yes, Mr. Atkins?
I'll make that motion to get that implemented and out of the way, but I'd still like to have another meeting to talk about the other
Sure. Yeah.
potential.
Okay, so you're making a motion, Mr. Atkins, to follow up with the 80 hours of additional sick paid off related to the COVID-19. Is there a second to that? Mr.
Will that motion include also for the part-time provisions?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So there's a motion on the floor. Mr. Massey?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I have one question.
Okay. Let's see if there's a second first, if anybody wants to make a second.
I'll make a second.
Okay, Mr. Massey makes a second. Okay.
Just one quick question as a discussion. Is the chief of police okay with
Mr. Limita?
Yeah, the chief is okay with it. We did discuss it earlier this week. I think he's probably on as an attendee if you guys want to discuss it with him directly.
I just want to make sure that he is in the loop while we're discussing this.
Well, let me see if I can. Let me see if I can find him here on the meeting. Let's see here. Okay. Chief Wiles, are you available?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening, Chief.
So you probably heard the concern, and we're looking at the 80 hours of additional paid sick time through the end of the year for those officers that may be affected by the virus. Any thoughts or concerns?
No, Superintendent Limita has my position correct. I agree with his recommendation on that. The only opportunity that they would use that time that you would possibly be extending them is if they became positive, if they were caring for a family member, or if they were quarantined as a result of an exposure. Other than that, they wouldn't be in play and wouldn't affect our staffing at all. So I think it's a nice thing to do in line with the act that was passed for other public employees.
Do we have any officers currently that are out? I don't know. I don't think that's a violation of HIPAA, is it, to tell us that? We're not attaching any names to it, but do we?
We do not. We are at full strength.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay. So there was a motion by Mr. Atkins, seconded by Mr. Massey. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone. Unless somebody has further question, I'll ask Ms. Lane to go through the roll call vote. Ms. Lane? Go ahead.
Yes. Mr. Atkins?
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Atkins?
Yes. Mr. Thomas?
You know, for some reason okay, go ahead, Mr. Thomas. Your mute button keeps going on and off. I don't know if you're... Mr. Thomas? You're unmuted.
Yes.
You're unmuted, Mr. Thomas.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Limita, was there another item that was pressing that you had brought before us?
Nope, that's all I had for the board in my request, based upon just the COVID-19. Thank you.
In terms of the concern that maybe we take a look and see if there's any other things that we can do for our first responders. And I know we have a meeting coming up later this month on the, I guess what would that be, the 21st? What's your thoughts on coming up with any additional strategies or funds or what have you that we could, measures we could take for those people that are on the front line? And like I said, I've heard from not just police, but from other, the fire department, the part-time fire, and the election workers that are in here working currently. So I don't know, is there anything that, if we meet again in another week or two, what would you be looking at, do you think, in terms of finding additional, I see hands up, I'll get to you, Mr. Massey and Mr. Thomas, in just a moment. But are there any areas that you would explore, or where are we with, having another meeting to discuss that, do you think?
Are you asking me, Scott?
Yes.
I would say, you guys, I understand the sentiment completely. These guys are putting themselves out on front lines when the rest of us are staying home and trying to limit contact, the very nature of their positions puts them in contact. So I understand the sentiment completely. You know, Shelby Township or the others, I know the state of Michigan is doing it for the state police, $650 or something every 2 weeks. You know, but unfortunately, I don't have the ability, we don't have the ability to change where that money comes from, and it is not a reimbursable expense moving forward, so the board needs to just be cognizant of that. I am concerned about what happens with us financially moving forward if our statutory revenue sharing doesn't show up in October, up by a third, and we lose $1 million, the impact to the budget. So I have a lot of budgetary concerns. If the board does decide to go ahead and move forward with some type of hazard pay or stipend for first responders, I just want you guys to have it well thought out. Is it all police, all fire? Does it include the DPW guys who are still being called out, like on the water main break today, or is it just police and fire? Who is it limited to? What kind of dollar amounts are you thinking about? And then, I mean, off the top of my head, where the money would come from, take a look at your budgets. I mean, this was the first year that we were putting as much as we were towards OPEB, and there's, you know, most of our budget is personnel. It's personnel driven, and layoffs are cut personnel programs to be cut. So I would be looking more at cutting down the contribution that we had for OPEB unfunded liabilities. The concern there is that we were still falling short of our corrective action plan for Public Act 202, but really I can be wherever the board would like to direct it. I can, you know, I just need to know in advance kind of the scope of it. So if the board would maybe think more along those lines, or are we including, what kind of dollar amounts are we including, so I get a total big picture of what your thoughts were behind this. Maybe I can make a more better informed recommendation of where that funding may come from.
The other thing is, I know the Parks and Rec that we took on, you know, the employees for Parks and Rec, you know, typically that department raises the money themselves for their programs and their salaries, what have you. With the cancellation pretty much of all parks program, that's no longer going to be a revenue neutral department. That is going to be actually a cost to the township. You know, we want to maintain our parks. We want to, I mean, it's the one place people can go right now, so it's not an area that we can cut out. And we want to be prepared when things get back online, but that's also a consideration. So I think your suggestions, Mr. Lehman, are heard by our board members. And I think, I mean, if the board wants to come back in a week and we have a special meeting to talk about this issue, or we can do it the fourth Tuesday. I don't know. You know, if we came up with something, we could always make it retroactive. So, I mean, it's not like our police officers are not getting anything right now. We can make it retroactive if we want to wait till the fourth Tuesday, or if the board wishes to meet next week, we can. I'm not sure, you know, I guess Mr. Lehman is saying he wants some direction from board members. So I guess what I would ask is everybody pull out their budget, take a look at the finances. We can probably get you actual to date on some of this stuff, but the bottom line is Mr. Lehman would need some direction as to where to get that money from, what your wishes are in terms of who should receive it. And I don't think we're prepared tonight to answer all those questions. Just as Mr. Massey and a few others said that, you know, this is the first they've heard of it. I'll get to you, Mr. Thomas. But I think we need to do some fact finding, and it's just a matter of, you know, if we want to meet next week or the following week to discuss that. Mr. Thomas?
I agree with Can you hear me?
Yes.
I agree with Trustee Mansky, Trustee Atkins, Trustee Mansor, that we meet next week.
Okay. Well, I would only ask that our board, what's that?
Can we meet next Thursday, maybe meet in, using social distancing, the 6 foot, can we meet together into the auditorium?
We're not supposed to. Yeah, we're not supposed to, according to the governor's executive order. But the if the board wants to meet next week, what I would ask though is that everyone take a look at their their budget, and let's email your suggestions to Mr. Limita and myself. I would ask that you don't send them to the entire board. We will assemble them and we'll communicate with the board, but if we are emailing each other and we're not really deliberating in public that way, but if you have suggestions in terms of where to look in the budget or the amount and who should be included, I would ask that you email those suggestions to Mr. Limita and myself. Mr. Atkins?
Yeah, thanks. Two things maybe to help. Superintendent Limita, could you send out how many total employees in the township, if we were looking at doing something across the board, how many total there are, part-time and full-time? And also, what would, as of the motion tonight, is it correct that all departments now are eligible for that 80-hour COVID Care Act or whatever? Is that correct now?
Correct. By the motion tonight, we've included police and fire, so everybody is eligible.
So could you just send out how many employees total, part-time and full-time? And looking at it a different way, I'd like to see what, I know you gave us a rough number on what 80 hours would mean for a couple of job classifications in terms of what that pay would be. Knowing that sunsets at the end of the year, if we looked at it a different way, what would 40 hours of pay be by department? By individual.
Okay.
If we looked at, just in my mind, I'm thinking of, a couple of creative ways, as if it was, when the COVID thing sunsets and half of that went away, the other half stayed in place, and the employees had the opportunity to consider when and if they wanted to utilize that. Just thoughts.
Okay, so I would ask that anybody has any other suggestions, what have you, that email Mr. Limita and myself. Is it a consensus of this board that you would like to have a meeting next Thursday? Let's just raise hands if that's a consensus of meeting next Thursday to discuss this issue, okay? Looks like we have a consensus, so we will have a special meeting next Thursday to discuss this issue specifically and keep it limited to that. With that, I think that wraps up our agenda for this evening. Again, we want to thank the public for joining us and bearing with us with our technology here. And we will plan to meet next Thursday at, we'll pick a time, maybe we'll do it earlier in the day or something, but being that everybody's working from home, it might be a little bit easier to even move it up a little bit in the day. But let's take a look at your budgets, give us some thought, and email your thoughts to Mr. Limita and I so that when we meet next Thursday, we can have a discussion that includes a number of ideas. We don't have to start from scratch. Ms. Lane?
Well, before we adjourn, I would like to wish everyone a very happy Easter, and to our other friends a happy Passover. And I hope that everybody has a healthy and a safe time with their families.
Thank you, Ms. Lane. One closing remark also. I don't know if you've seen the press release that went out with regard to the fire department, but our fire department received a new ISO rating. I'm not sure that most people, unless you probably have delved into insurance or own a business that has had an issue with it, but the ISO rating is significant for everyone's insurance, whether you're a business or homeowner. And the hard work of our fire department in making sure that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, our response time, even the DPW with the water supply. We don't have water in every portion of the township. We don't have municipal water. So that creates its own hurdle that we had to get over. But to reach the ISO rating that we have is phenomenal. And hopefully individuals and business owners will see that reflected in their insurance premiums in the future. We don't know what that calculation is, but hopefully people will appreciate the hard work of our fire department in helping us to obtain that. I'll take a motion to adjourn if somebody wants to raise their hand. Okay, Ms. Lane, you making the motion?
Yes, sir.
And,
To support.
Adjourn meeting.
okay, and Mr. Mansour?
Support.
Okay. Ms. Lane, you want to take a roll call vote?
Absolutely. Mr. Mansour?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
No.
Mr. Atkins?
Yes.
Mr. Gozak?
Yes.
Mr. Massey?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Mr. Chair?
Yes. And we do wish everybody a happy Easter and a good Passover. And we hope all of your families stay healthy during this time. So thank you, and we will speak again next Thursday. We'll get the time out here in the next few days. Okay? Thank you, everyone.
Night.